Aha! Lots of issues with the internet. But we're about to start. And here is the live streaming. Thank you for joining us again today. I was traveling from quite far away, from a place called Ferreira do Alentejo. All right? Quite far from my home. So I was driving, and I just made it on time to be able to meet you. So I am looking forward to our next session together. I hope you guys can see me, and if so, as usual, press the like button so that I know that you're there, and comment where you are coming from so that I know who I am teaching today. And today's lesson is going to be mostly about a simple introduction to color mixing. So we are going to look into some examples on how to compress the tones. Now, question for you. Please do tell me, why do we need to compress the tones when we are painting? Why not just copy the colors that we see in reality? What is the need, really and truly, of painting less tones than what we see in reality? Please write it on the chat, and I really want to know why. There must be a reason. So pretend I don't know anything about painting. What is the reason why we don't paint all the colors that we see? Give me a few reasons, more than one. But one thing I can tell you, we must compress the tones when we are painting, in most cases. There are very few exceptions where you don't need to compress tones. So yeah, let me know why. Why? Write it. And I will be checking the chat. Everyone that is watching, please press like straight away so that I know you're watching. And I'm looking forward to knowing what are your comments. So, hi Timney, nice to see you as well, although I cannot see you yet. Filomena, beijinhos, saudades. Vamos estar juntos em breve. Mario from Oeiras, Portugal, very good. And tell me first, okay, so Timney has a theory. I'm reading from the computer now. The human brain functions simple. We see complex things with eyes. So it's a way to simplify, right? And I have an Instagram user saying hi. Hi to you as well. If you can, jump to my YouTube channel, because you will be able to see all the image. Instagram cuts and only shows the middle. So, jump to my YouTube channel and join us during this live stream. If anyone is watching from Instagram or from LinkedIn or from Facebook, please jump to my YouTube channel. It's on the description text below. So Timney, essentially what you're saying is that we are simplifying reality. Reality is too complex, and we see a complex reality with our eyes. And then what are you assuming? You're assuming that the eyes see more complexity than the one we can paint, right? That's partially true. Yes, indeed. But tell me more reasons. Why? Aha! So now Cameron, there is a theory. You wrote, we don't have enough pigments to make all the, and I assume it's all the colors. That is correct. So we can see, some people can see millions of colors, but most humans can definitely see over 1 million colors, but we can only paint a few thousands. So pigments heavily compress the quantity of colors that we can paint. All right? That's why we need to compress the tonal range when we are painting. Now, before we start, and today is going to be a practical lesson, we are starting with an introduction to the Munsell color system. But before we start, just think with me. If we have a black object and we put our hand on top of the object, let me see if I can demonstrate with this sheet. Maybe you can see. Oh yeah, look how my hand is still casting a shadow on top of the black, isn't it? So there is a shadow that is blacker than the paper. If the shadow is blacker than the paper, it means the paper is not black. Okay, so this is the first thing we need to learn. Even the blackest paint that we have at the moment as a paint form is far from black, because the shadow is much darker than the black paint that we have accessible nowadays at the beginning of the 21st century in 2024. So let's start with that. Now let's go to the other extreme, white. If you walk around with something white and imagine you're outdoors and it's catching the sunlight, is this as bright as the light of the sun? Obviously not. It's way darker than the light of the sun that is shining on it. That means it does not reflect all the light that it receives. So by definition, white paint is also not white. It's just a pale gray, but it absorbs light. It doesn't reflect all the light. So, and I haven't even started. We just talked about two random colors. So we don't have real black. We don't have any black that is black enough to represent the deep shadows of nature. And we don't have real white. We don't have any white that can compete with the brightness, with the lightness of light in nature. Do you understand that? We are limited in our range. The whitest white we can do when we draw is usually the white of the paper. Yeah, it's white paper, but it's not a source of light. It's not as bright as a real light source. So we don't have a real white. We only have white, so to speak, paper. It's not white enough. And the blackest black we have when we're drawing is something like charcoal or black pastel or whatever. It's not dark at all. As I've demonstrated, you know, even a black shadow on top of that would be much blacker. So if you have any questions, please ask. And hola Ana, and hola Leonor. Good to see you as well. And regarding colors, so now you know that we do not have enough pigments to represent the colors of nature. So what did classical artists do? Classical artists, they used tricks to make their paintings more luminous. Do you understand? Little tricks to make paintings luminous. So I'm going to show you now some drawing, one drawing only from the 19th century. Nudity alert. Sorry, you cannot learn history of art if you don't look into nudes. And I'm going to show you some of the... Okay, I think what I'll do, I'm going to share screen and I'm going to show you some of the... Give me a second. Is that share screen? Yes. So, now that you can see the screen, we are going to look into some of the drawings that existed in the late 19th century. So do let me know if you can see this drawing. Comment on the chat box below. And we do not have whiter white than the white of the paper when we're doing a charcoal drawing. So this is another drawing from the 19th century. This one is by Henrique Pousão, and it was made when he was 21 years old. And one of the things that you're going to see straight away when you look at classical drawings like this is the extreme compression of tones in the lights and the extreme compression of tones within the shadows. Okay, let me explain. Everything that belongs to the lights stays very light. So for example, beginners would have made that shadow in the middle of the chest way too dark. For sure, that's what beginners do. Beginners exaggerate the variations in the lights. But what all these academic artists would learn, that's why they would go to Paris. One of the things they would learn is actually they would learn to compress the tones. They would learn that everything in the lights must stay luminous and exceedingly pale. So the difference between the top lights where the eraser was used, there were no erasers back then, but it was stale bread. So Henrique Pousão, he applied a thin layer of gray all over the light with the stump, with the paper stump, and then he would go with stale bread and he would erase, he would rub off some of the brighter lights. But the difference between, let's say, the lightest tone of all and the shadows surrounding it is minimal. It's actually so minimal that it's almost invisible when you're quite close up. And yet, when you stand back, you clearly see the definition of the anatomy starting to show. So I want you to realize that there is a lot of things that I want to show you that have to do with compression of tones. I'm just quickly trying to see if anyone wrote any comment. So write on the comments below what you are thinking as I am teaching you, and then I will check the comments later, okay? And I'll respond to any questions. Exactly the same thing happens inside of the shadows. So essentially, this shadow here is very, very similar to that one there. There's practically just two tones, you see? They're quite simplified, all these shadows. Here I can count one tone, two tones in the shoulder. You don't really have a lot of variation inside of the shadows. The shadows are quite flat and they're quite compressed again. So they're practically all the same color. You see, all the shadows, you have maybe 3 tones in the shadows. You have something that resembles black or is even black occasionally, which is just used as an accent. Then you have a very dark gray, and then you have a medium gray, medium dark. And all the shadows are pretty much represented, let's say, with about 3 tones. All the lights are represented with more or less 2 or 3 tones as well. Not much difference here between the lights and the shadows again. I mean, the lights inside of the lights, they're compressed. The shadows inside of the shadows, they're compressed. Where you have most variation, it's generally in the transitions along the terminator. So where light gradually moves into shadow, that's where you tend to have some kind of blending. That's where you tend to have some kind of gradient. That's where you tend to have some kind of complexity. There are more colors here in the transition than actually inside the shadow itself or inside the light area itself. So you're already learning that images need to be compressed. Let's look at some of the drawings with a bit more detail. Look at the economy of means. These drawings are not detailed, and yet they look so stunning. Because classical artists would also learn how to create the illusion of complexity. But the drawings are kept simple enough. And because they're kept simple enough, you tend to have, let me just zoom in a bit more so you can see better the images. You tend to have much more elegance. So this compression of tones, like I keep telling my students that are doing the Bargue course, the Charles Bargue drawing course, this compression of tones creates great elegance and great harmony between the different parts of the drawing. Okay, it's better than if you had all the colors showing off. So let me just quickly zoom in. Look at the economy of means that created that face. It's absolutely beautiful. You have what, 4 or 5 tones, and then a few thin lines as accents. And that creates the illusion of detail. There is no detail, as you can see. My goodness me, it's quite blurry. There is no detail at all. And yet, when you zoom back, when you zoom out, you have a full portrait there. Remember this, okay? Remember the importance of compressing tones. Remember the importance of keeping all the lights light enough and all the shadows dark enough. This is a student's work. So Henrique Pousão was 21 years old when he did this. I find that the reflected light under the chin is too light. He should have done it slightly darker, okay? But that's fine, because this is still an excellent job if you consider the age of these kind of students. You know, academic training is tough, as you all know. Again, the economy of means. This hand is beautifully simplified. It's only 3 or 4 tones, if, and then a few accents made with black chalk, black stone. So you know something, these drawings are rarely seen in public. Usually academic drawings tend to be quite hidden. Don't ask me why. It has to do with a lot of politics as well, and political correctness and all of that nonsense, but mostly there has been a hiding of a lot of academic art from the 19th century. These kind of drawings are taboo amongst most contemporary art circles, because many people say this isn't art. Yeah, and I rest my case on that note. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my lovely normal camera. I want to stop the screen share. Apologies. I'm having a slight technical problem. Here we are. And I'm going to read comments that you might have had regarding the compression of tones, the compression of values that we discussed before. I only see wow, yes, hey. Okay, you are university students. We need higher education, huh? We need to talk a little bit more, a bit more complex analysis. Write down, please, what you guys learned so far. And what were your impressions of this first drawing I've shown you by Henrique Pousão? Okay? It's good to see the hey and the hello and the wow, but this is a lecture for university level. Now, we are going to debate color mixing. And I want you to approach color exactly the same way that Henrique Pousão approached that drawing. The idea is that you must compress the tones in the light, then you must compress the tones in the shadow. So make all the colors in the light very similar in terms of tone, in terms of chiaroscuro, you understand? Make them pale enough. Make all the colors in the shadow dark enough and quite similar. Do not create a lot of variations in the shadows, no. And then create more complexity towards the terminator. So as the light drops towards the shadow, it accelerates its dropping. You have more and more and more tones appearing. The moment it enters the shadow, it flattens again, and shadows are quite flat. You got it? So, I'm still waiting for your comments. I will proceed with the lesson, but I need you to really write down what you've learned so far by looking at Henrique Pousão's drawing. Like I was saying before, unfortunately those drawings are rarely seen in public. They tend to be literally hidden. They're rarely seen, okay? They're usually hidden in the reserves. And for many, many, many years, and this I find this quite shameful, we could not even find a good photograph of this kind of drawings. Thankfully, that there is now a group of artists that has a renewed interest in classical art. That renewed interest is exploding in countries like United States, Italy, definitely in huge parts of Asia. And it has to do also with the animation industry, as you know. Cartoons and animation is what is reviving classical technique of painting. So finally, there are individuals that ask permission to see those drawings on the flash, and they photograph the drawings with high quality with their iPhones or whatever, and finally they're releasing those images online, because for decades institutions didn't do that. Faculties of fine arts, they have archives with hundreds of drawings like this, really good drawings. You don't see high quality images online. I'm actually pretty embarrassed to say that, for example, the Faculty of Fine Arts of Porto, that has a beautiful collection of drawings by Henrique Pousão, the same artist I've shown you, the photos are ridiculously bad. I mean, we need urgently to have high resolution photos of this kind of drawings so that artists from around the world can study some of the greatest masters of the 19th century, okay? And I'm deliberately showing you students' drawings, because students' drawings, you see more clearly the process. It's not as sophisticated yet, so you can see very clearly the way they were thinking as they were drawing. So I've got here some comments here. Hand purple, blue, peace. Badun, I don't understand what you wrote, but hand purple, blue, peace. So Canon or Cameron, by the way, how do you prefer to be called? Let me know. You wrote there was only 3 or 4 tones, but how come the transition is so good? Because actually you don't need more than that. What you need is to create those, let's say, 3, 4, 5 tones, yeah. And then 10 minutes before the drawing is finished, you smudge them, you blend them. And it's pretty much what we do in painting as well. You paint like if it was a tile, like different tiles of different colors. If you're painting in oils, of course, because oils still stay wet. And then 10 minutes before you finish the painting, you just blend where necessary and you create the transitions. Then Mario asks how many hours Henrique Pousão spent to do that picture. Now, these pictures, by definition, they were about A2 size, so they're relatively large. And as you can see as well from the, I'm just going to quickly show you again. As you can see from the, give me a second, I'm just going to show you the same image again. So as you can see from the picture, apologies, here we go, preview. The paper was rough, because back in the day they didn't actually know how to make smooth papers yet, so all the papers were laid. All the papers had a kind of a vertical weave. Can you see vertical lines cutting through the paper? Because the paper pulp would be put on top of a mesh. It was a kind of like wire. And that mesh would hold the paper pulp. So the paper would dry with this grain, with this kind of texture, you see? And the drawings were just more or less kind of A2 size. And they would be done in a maximum of 12 hours, generally less. So if this was like exam pieces, you would have a time limit. So you had a maximum of about 12 hours. If I'm not mistaken, it was 12 hours, the absolute maximum. But you have breaks in between, you know, the model needs to rest, the student might want to have a break as well, your eyes get tired, and so on and so forth. And then you've got another question. Is it more important to blend the tones than trying to make more tones by mixing? Yes and no. If you're working in black and white, blending will do the job. But if you are working in color, you might want to paint more tiles by mixing the exact color you want. Because if you just blend, you tend to pollute the color and create a muddy color. To create imagine you're blending a very pale color with a very dark color, and they're both bright, they're both vibrant, but when you blend them, you create grayish middle tones, because the pale white with the dark black mix together and create a more muddy, grayish color, which might be what you want, but it rarely is, okay? So when you're painting in color, you might want to paint more of the necessary colors, but still you need to compress, because it's impossible to represent what you see in nature in most of the times. Then we have another question. Simple contrast of black and white alongside with a perfect drawing is enough to portray anything in our works? Yes and no, depends, because your painting can be about color, for example. You might be a colorist, so you might want to express the beauty of yellow against a grayish mauve, and in that case, of course, black and white will not do it. I still agree with you though, because, you know, essentially, Deepanjali, when you have a good structure in black and white, that's already 80% of everything you need for realist art. Because most things about realist art are about, number one, a good drawing and a good composition, of course, but we're not talking about that at the moment. So number one, good drawing skills. And number 2, good values. Why? Because values have to do with drawing. Values have to do with shape. You are describing the shapes in space. That's why we use values. It still has to do with shapes. So yes, 80% of a good painting is usually good shapes. Shapes in terms of outline, but also shapes in terms of the topography of the landscape. You know, describing the mountains and valleys of in this case the human body. So yes. Thank you, Canon. That's good. And Ferreira, I'm glad you're attending the lesson. And indeed, Anna, you must try to do this about compressing the color, because it is counterintuitive. Our intuition does not want to compress the colors. Our intuition thinks that we must paint all the colors we see. It's totally counterintuitive. But if you compress the colors, you will get much stronger paintings. All right? All right, so I think we can go to a practical aspect of the drawing. And what I'm going to do is, before I start the painting and before you start with your paints, let's just do a little bit of color theory. Okay? So let's look back again into our color theory here. So let me just zoom in so you guys are not looking at stupid things. Let's look at some colors now. And what I would like you to do really is to start thinking about question number 1, which is a really tough question. Sorry that I'm always looking sideways. I'm just maneuvering the computer and pressing buttons. That's the reason I keep looking that way, okay, and reading comments. But essentially, what I would like you to do and to see now is I'm just trying to make this flat. I want you to think in terms of primary colors. Let's begin with question 1. What are the primary colors? Is it red, blue, and yellow? Is it magenta, cyan, and yellow? Or neither of these? Write down on the chat box below. I want to know who votes for red, blue, and yellow. Just put R, B, Y, and I know what you mean. Who votes for magenta, cyan, and yellow? Just write M, C, Y, and I know what you mean. And who votes for neither? And then write neither. You have to write more if you vote for neither. Okay? So, traditionally, we've always learned in art school red, blue, yellow, or magenta, cyan, yellow, depending on the teacher. And now I really want to know your opinion. Okay? And actually, I'm not going to proceed with this part of the lesson until I read everybody's opinion. I would like everybody to vote. Everybody that is now watching this video, please vote on the chat box below. Is it RBY, red, blue, yellow? Is it MCY, magenta, cyan, yellow? So the classical red would be vermilion. Nowadays would be a cadmium red, something like that. The classical blue would be kind of ultramarine or cobalt blue. And the classical yellow would be a bright, vivid yellow, something like a cadmium yellow, you see, this kind of color. And of course, in magenta, we have a quinacridone red or magenta or whatever it's called. Sometimes it's called rose, permanent rose, and these kind of silly names. But it's a quinacridone pigment. The cyan would be a phthalocyanine blue, a phthalo blue, as it's called affectionately amongst fine artists, and the yellow would be the same of this first color chart. So yeah, write down, and I'm going now to read what you guys wrote. Okay, we have an amazing voting system. Everybody's reacting. I will reply to Rawan very soon about which are the colors to compress and what to leave. I'll tell you in a second, Rawan. Remind me again if I don't talk about it in a few minutes, okay? Write the question again. Now, we've got yellow, green, and blue. No green, no. Green is a mix between yellow and blue. It's a secondary color, it's not a primary color. You are probably confusing with light, because the primary colors of light do contain green instead. But we're talking here about pigments. We are talking here about mixing paints. But thanks for voting. I really love when you do. So Raji says magenta, cyan, yellow. Some people say both are right. Magenta, cyan, yellow. Magenta, cyan, yellow. Green is a combination of blue and yellow, exactly. So red, blue, and yellow. Red, blue, and yellow. Magenta, cyan, and yellow. Essentially, magenta, cyan, and yellow is kind of winning your votes so far. And there are different primary colors for paints and for printer inks. Interesting contribution, Raji. Very interesting contribution. So let me see here. Maybe both, Vishal. You're a good diplomat. And we're not talking about light, Mario. So yes. But in pigments, you voted for red, blue, and yellow, correct? So Badun says red, blue, and yellow. I can see your friends. But magenta, cyan, and yellow is kind of winning. And then, red, blue, and yellow for traditional, and magenta, cyan, yellow for modern. We are getting nearer now with that last contribution. Thank you, Rosa. Back in the day, artists did not have enough pigments to represent most of the colors that you can do nowadays. They did not have any pigment that was similar to magenta. It just didn't exist, okay? And they did not have any pigments that was similar to cyan. It also didn't exist. The nearer colors that they had back then, more similar to the primary colors, would be vermilion. So I'm going to show you again. The more similar colors they had back then were these ones. They had ultramarine, they had vermilion, ultramarine more like cobalt blue actually. They had vermilion, and they had a good bright yellow. But this color chart is already lying, because if you mix this kind of red with this kind of blue, you don't get purple. Forget it. Impossible. Because this kind of red is actually not a red. It's a shade of orange. This kind of red is not primary. This is not primary red. This is a red that is already a bit orange. This kind of blue is not a primary blue. This is a blue that is already a little bit purple. And the mix between this fake blue and this fake red would not be, never would not be purple. Impossible. You would actually get something more similar to brown. So the answer is, if you use red, blue, and yellow, you cannot mix violet. You cannot mix all the crimson colors and magentas, impossible. There's actually a huge chunk of the spectrum that you're not able to mix when you use the traditional red, blue, yellow. So yes, I'm sorry, everything you learned in primary school was wrong. And Santa Claus does not exist, okay? And they taught us the wrong primary colors. At school they taught us red, blue and yellow. It's incorrect. Now let us talk. Don't celebrate yet, voters of magenta, cyan and yellow. Do not celebrate yet. Now, with magenta, cyan and yellow, in theory, you can make a bright red in the middle, similar to that red we had here before in the traditional colors. So yes, in theory, if you mix magenta and yellow, you get red. In theory, if you mix magenta and cyan, you get this kind of blue. And this is the only one that is true. If you mix yellow and blue, you do get a very nice bright green. Yes, in theory, this is what you get when you mix the colors. In practice, it's not true again. So when you mix bright yellow with magenta, you do not get such a bright red. The result looks muddy and brownish as well. It looks just dirty. It doesn't look vivid like this. Okay? These so-called three primary colors only work better if the paints are transparent. So if you use very diluted magenta with diluted yellow, yes, you might get a more vivid red indeed. But if you use these kind of colors thickly, forget it. You get really muddy results. So again, this works better in printing than in painting. Because in printing, like Raji said, the paint is it's applied very thinly. It's applied very transparently. So you get more vivid secondary colors. But if you paint, usually your paintings are not that thin. So the color looks muddy. So are these primary colors? No. Aha. And now I think I have to stop showing the camera because I really need to face the camera and justify what I've just said. Neither group is correct. You're pretty shocked, aren't you? In reality, there is no such thing as only three primary colors in pigments. In light, yes, but in pigments, no. No three colors can give you all the other colors that are possible to achieve with pigments. So I think somebody commented maybe both. Bishal, you are right. You are right because indeed we need both. So we need the magenta, but we also need a bright red. Do you understand? We need a cyan color to make beautiful greens, but we also need a purplish blue, like ultramarine blue, to make nice violets and purples. So there is no such thing as only three primary colors. That's a myth that we have to dispel. Okay? And I would like you to write your comments about this surprise. Because even at university level, they're probably not teaching this at all. So we need to learn it now. Fine arts students, you are learning lots of new things. Okay? So pay attention to all the lessons because we are going to dive deeply into detail. I want to show you again I want to show you again the image. So are these the primary colors? Maybe if you put them all and even so it wouldn't be enough. We would need more pigments to represent all the colors of nature that we can represent with pigment. I mean, let's clarify that. So in the Munsell color system, they assume that we need many different hues in order to explain the colors of nature. You don't need all of these hues to paint the colors of nature, okay? But in order to explain, we have to be quite specific. So from now onwards, if I say 5R, I'm talking about that specific red at the top. If I say 10R, I'm talking about that exact shade of orange at the top right. If I say 10Y, I'm talking about that bright yellow on the right hand corner. It's different from 5Y. 5Y is already more similar to orange. 10Y is the bright pure yellow. 5GY is the greenish yellow. It's green yellow, GY, okay? G stands for green, Y stands for yellow, B stands for blue, P stands for purple, R stands for red, okay? And with these colors, you can talk about all the hues that you can see, and you give them exact numbers. And then you also have in-betweens. You might have, for example, 7.5R. Where would 7.5 be? Between number 5 and number 10. So a 7.5R would be between those two. You got it? Would be a slightly more orangey red. Or you can have a 2.5R. 2.5 is less than 5. So it would be a slightly more purplish red. Okay, it would be more between those two, 2.5, 5, 7.5, 10. And then it jumps back to 2.5. So 2.5 yellow-blue. Apologies, let me cancel a phone call. Apologies. Kátia, estou a dar aula live stream, não posso falar agora. Beijinho. Apologies for that. Are you guys still there? Yes, I just had to answer a phone call that came at the worst possible time. So, do you understand so far the beginning of the Munsell color system? And what we can do is indeed to create lots and lots of color explanations, all right, by using a simple color code and the number. So let's go back to the images and then we will speak again. Let's go back to the images. Maybe today it's going to be more theory, okay? We will do the practice next week because I really need you to learn this before we start painting. These are the most important hues, these ones. So you need a bright yellow, you need an orangey yellow, maybe a greenish yellow, although you can do without the greenish yellow. It's very easy to mix. You need a red, you need a magenta, you need a strong purple, you need this kind of hues They're too pale in this color chart. And that's the thing I want to tell you. These are not the pure pigments that we use for painting. In painting, we use much, much stronger, brighter, intense colors. Okay? So a strong green, for example, would never contain so much white. And deliberately, I'm showing you color charts from the internet that are quite wrong. When you guys search online, you need to learn to distinguish between the truth and between quite false information. Obviously, that this is not a primary color for painters. It's full of white. So this is quite wrong, okay? But I had to show you so that you learn. I cannot just show you the good things. I have to show you the bad ones. In this color chart is slightly better, but it's still wrong. Because, for example, a perfect primary blue in paint would be phthalo blue. And phthalo blue is really dark before you mix it with white. And now we're going to discuss the juice of the knowledge. I would like everybody to write down on your notebooks. I would like you to write down on your notebooks that there are only 3 important, really important aspects of color, and only 3, okay? The hue we already saw. It's the name of the color. So the question is it a shade of yellow, or is it a shade of blue, or is it a shade of purple, or green, or red? That's the hue, okay? The hue is just to which color group does the color belong. So if you're painting the color of sand on a beach, would it be purple? Probably not. I've never seen beaches with purple sand, okay? So I would like you to learn that hue is the name that we give. It's spelled like this, H-U-E, is the name that we give to the group of colors. Is it a shade of green, or is it a shade of yellow, or is it red? The color you're trying to mix. You find the hue first. But hue is the least important of the 3 aspects of color. The most important by far is this one, value. Okay? So value represents the darkness or the lightness of the color you are mixing. So in this scale, you have value number 1, which is dark, number 2 is a bit lighter, number 3 is a bit lighter, number 4 lighter, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. In this scale, you can go higher, of course. You can go brighter and brighter, and theoretically you could go darker than 1. If we find absolute black, there's going to be someday N0. Okay? So theoretically you could go down to 0, and the brighter the light, the brighter the white, you could go higher than 9. The whitest whites we have at the moment do not reach 10. Okay, just to give you an idea. And finally, chroma. Chroma is what some people also call saturation. How vivid a color is, how colorful a color is. In the Munsell color system, we use the word chroma. Chroma, it means color. I believe it's from Greek. Chromatic. You see how chromatic a certain shade of red is. So let me show you from very, very bright red. Let's fill up the screen. So this would be a quite bright red. And now less bright, more and more gray. The more we move to the left, the more grayish the red becomes. And now this is actually quite dull. Look at this. This is just a slightly reddish gray. You understand? So you can get this kind of colors, more chromatic or less chromatic. And why is this important? The Munsell color system is the best system probably in the world for artists to understand color. Any color that you want to mix, you can quickly find the solution by just looking at this kind of color charts. Do you understand? So you have colors that are very bright. If the color is not very bright, it means that for sure... I'm not going to tell you yet. I'm going to ask a question first. So write down on the chart below, write down how do you neutralize a color? How do you make a color less vivid? Do let me know, okay? Write on the chart below. So option number 1, how do you make the color less vivid? Option number 1, do you mix it with gray? So to make a color more neutral, do you mix it with gray? Option 1. Option number 2, do you mix it with its opposite color in the color wheel? Option number 3, do you mix it with black, white, and a touch of brown? I'm deliberately confusing you now. Option number 4. No, it's enough for now. I'll give you these 3 options. So write down. So Sylvia says you mix with the complementary color, correct? Let's go for votes. Let's see who wins. Complementary. Instagram user, please jump to my YouTube so I can see your name. Or if you're typing from Instagram, please write your name in the front so I can acknowledge you, because Ecam Live does not let me see the names of people on Instagram. But we've got Add Gray, and then Ana Ferreira says please to what? What was the question? Always write the context of your answer, okay? So I understand what you are referring to, and then I can help you. So option 1, do you mix it? Oh, hello Anna, good to see you. If you jump to YouTube, you will see the full image. Do not try not to watch these lectures over Instagram, because they're cut in the middle. You don't see the sides of the lecture. Instagram cuts and makes it vertical, which is really annoying. We're looking at paintings that sometimes you have to see the complete sides, obviously, and the charts. Most people are still not responding. So tell me, to neutralize a color, to make it less intense, do you mix it with its complementary? Do you mix it with black and white? Or do you mix it with black and white and a touch of brown? And tell me why you're choosing any of these options. So Anna says gray, Mario says the complementary, Leonore says 1. I forgot now what was 1. I'm going to tell you the answer, okay, in a second. But now let's keep looking at the images I have for you. When you are describing any color, you say the hue. Is it a 5 red, or is it a 2.5 yellow, or you understood from the previous color chart. So you say first to which hue does it belong, or is it a neutral? Obviously, if it's neutral gray, then it doesn't belong to any hue. And by the way, neutral grays do exist, okay? Stop saying that it's a myth and that all colors are relative. That's not true. Neutral grays do exist. It's a gray that reflects all the visible light without leaning towards any of them. without being too greenish, or without being too bluish, or without being too reddish, or without being too yellowish, okay? And neutral gray does not lean towards any of those. This is how the Munsell Book of Color looks like. This book costs more than 1,600 American dollars. You don't need to buy it, okay? This is the Rolls Royce of the color mixing books. It costs a lot of money. I bought it because I teach color theory and practice, and these color chips are very, very handy because you can literally take any of these colors away from the book and compare it to reality. So if someone does not know how to mix that color, for example, because it is difficult to mix, obviously, it looks like gray, but not exactly, then I can come with a Munsell color book and show that this color is not as gray as a true gray, but is not as brownish as a true yellow-green brown. Which, by the way, this yellow-green brown is just a shade of that yellow. This is the color. So all the other colors came from this color mixed with what? Complementary or with gray? But the Munsell Book of Color is extremely handy. And in these lessons, when we start mixing colors, I will refer to the color codes. Okay? So these are the symbols. 5Y means that it belongs to the group of the yellow number 5. 8 is the value, so it means it's relatively dark. And 14 is the chroma. The higher the number, the more chromatic, the more colorful. So it means it's quite colorful. All right? It belongs up there next to the bright yellow. So it belongs to the row of 14 in chroma. You see the number 14? You go down, you have bright yellow. And then if you go down one more, that's where that color chip came from. It belongs here in this empty space. Now, as you can see from this kind of color charts, the Munsell Book of Color, you can only have maximum chroma in just 1 or 2 color chips. The moment you mix white, it loses chroma, so it becomes less colorful. And the moment you mix black, it also starts losing chroma. No wonder, because it starts very bright up there. You mix black, you are gradually going towards blackness. So of course it's losing chroma, it's losing color, because black cannot maintain the vivid nature of that bright yellow. And the same with white. The moment you mix white, you immediately made it grayer. Why? Please write down on the chat box below, why does adding white make most colors become muddy and grayer? Write it down, okay? I'm going to read it in a second. And now this is incredibly useful. I highly recommend a website called handprint.com. It contains some spectacular information about color theory. So I really, really recommend this website, okay? University students, this should be your favorite website about color, especially watercolors. And what we see here, I'm going to zoom in, is you're seeing some of the most important pigments used in painting and how chromatic they are, how colorful they are. So the more in the center, the less colorful. That's why black and white is right there in the middle. And then the more towards the outside of the circle, the more colorful. So let's start with the least colorful of all. It's black and white. There's nothing there. There is no real color. It's not yellow, it's not red, it's not blue, it's not green, you know. But then you start seeing some colors. So burnt umber, for example, or raw umber, are nothing more than shades of an orangey yellow. So now you know that raw umber and burnt umber, they're just dark orange yellow. Do you understand? They belong to the same slice of pizza as orange yellow. It's just orange yellow with black. It gives you the color raw umber or burnt umber. Burnt if it's more reddish, raw if it's more yellowish. Another example, chromium oxide green or hooker's green. It's just a more muted version of a really bright green. It's just more grayish, more dull. You got it? Indigo is nothing more than a very dark version of a kind of a cyanin blue, which is more vivid. You understand? So the more outside, the brighter the color. And now look at this. Blues cannot be as bright. They cannot be as bright as some of the oranges we have here or yellows. So pyrrole orange, for example, is much brighter, it's more colorful, it's more chromatic, it's more vivid than the brightest blue that we can find. In this color chart they say it's ultramarine. That's a bit debatable, but anyway, you got the idea. So pyrrole orange, and look even brighter. Very soon I will stop using the word brighter because brighter is the wrong word, all right? I'm just using it now because we never used the word chromatic before, I bet. But let's learn the correct technical terms. Cadmium yellow has got more chroma. It's more vivid than any of those blues we saw below. That's why it's in the outer circle. Okay? The brightest green that we have in this list, it's not as vivid, it's not as chromatic as that yellow. What does this mean for painters? If you're lovers of bright colors, if you want to use vivid, chromatic, punchy colors, then use a lot of yellows and oranges. Got it? It's a very, very important color chart because it shows you where all of these pigments lie in the color wheel. So quinacridone magenta and quinacridone violet, they're actually the same hue. The difference is that the violet is darker, but it's within the same hue in this color chart as the magenta. See? It's not more purplish. This is amazing. I mean, it's a real eye-opener. Now, I won't bore you more with this, but I'm about to stop. The next thing I want to show you is that all the different pigments belong to a range of black and white. So if you take a black and white photo of your painting, if you painted something bright yellow, it belongs up here together with the pale grays, because yellow is a very pale color. The darker you go, so red is somewhere in the middle. It's similar to a medium gray. Most reds belong to a medium gray range. And which is the darker bright color you can get? It's definitely the violets and the dark blues. It's similar to very dark grays. Why is this important? You need to know the tones of the colors you are using. I see sometimes beginners trying to put yellow in dark shadows, for example, or trying to put dark violet in the lights. And then they make the lights dirty and muddy, and they make the shadows equally dirty and muddy. So we need to remember that bright chromatic yellows are very pale. Huh? Don't forget this. And now I'm gonna answer your question. How do you neutralize a color? Do you mix gray? By gray I mean black and white. Do you mix its complementary color? Or do you mix black, white, and a touch of brown? Let's now see what people wrote. Then adding white can create tints, make the color lighter, but also reducing its vibrancy of that color. Indeed, Rosa, the moment you add white, and remember, white is not really white. As we discussed at the beginning of the lesson, white is nothing more than pale gray. White paint absorbs light, so it's not white, it's pale gray. You got it? The moment you add white pigment, you are adding gray, obviously. You make it muddy, because we don't have real white pigment that is as bright as white light. We don't have it. That's one of the reasons. Another reason is, of course, it would dilute the yellowness, or it would dilute the blueness, or it would dilute whatever, the greenness, because you are adding something that is not green, you are adding something that is not yellow. So obviously it would lose its intensity. But a big reason is because our white paint is not white enough. It's just pale gray. So the chroma quickly drops because you are mixing gray. The moment you mix white, you are mixing pale gray. Remember that. Always remember that. It's an amazing thing to remember, and it will change the way you paint. So Raji asks, are neon fluorescent colors, day glow colors, highly chromatic? The answer is yes. Day glow colors, neon colors, they explode the scale. We don't use it in the Munsell color system, although they can be described using Munsell terms, but we don't use them for one reason. They're quite fugitive, they're not light fast, so they're not recommended pigments to be used by artists. The Munsell color book was created for painters that want to create fine art that also lasts. Although in my opinion, they should have included the fluorescent colors. I mean, if you pay $1,600 like I did, it should have had the fluorescent colors, obviously. Maybe with a note behind the color chip saying there are no known pigments of this tone that are light fast. But in my opinion, it should include all the fluorescent colors. Okay, now answering your question. Whoever said to mix with a complementary color, pay attention now. Do you neutralize a color by mixing it with its complementary? And the answer is no. No, you don't. Because when you mix with its complementary color, surprisingly, it doesn't go as a straight line. So you don't see the straight line connecting viridian with those bright reds. No way, no. You see a curve. So this is very strange, but it means that initially the color gets more purplish until it finally becomes neutral, and then it moves towards the viridian, but as a curve. What does that mean as a curve? It means bad news. It means you are not keeping it within the same hue. You are actually changing the hue when you try to neutralize it with a complementary color. because geometrically this does not follow a straight line. What I'm trying to say is that the pure red would be more orange, and then mixed with viridian it would get more purplish, more crimson. So it's not anymore the orange red, it's the crimson. Do you understand? We changed color already. The hue was already warped. And you definitely do not want to do that if you want to understand color in depth. So these are the hues that you end up with when you mix with the opposite color. It's crazy making. It goes from bright orange, yellowish orange, all the way to reds and almost magentas, shades of magentas. Not good. You do not get a good neutral when you add the complementary color. So again, another myth that we learned at school and that needs to be dispelled. This is another myth that we learned at school. Wow, the things you are learning with this lesson. Nope, mixing the complementary color does not neutralize the color in a controlled enough way. The best way is to mix, okay, now you know the answer. Is it with gray? So is it black and white, or is it black, white, and a touch of brown? Write down in the comments below and write why. Why? And then I will tell you. Now, some people are already writing, wow, interesting. I know, it's fascinating because the things we're learning are usually wrong. Online and offline. So now we have black and white and burnt umber. Very good, Rob. Why? Why? And then I need to make a better explanation in a second, but this is an excellent way to start. Raji, black, white, and a bit of brown. Because white is a cool color, slightly bluish, brown helps to neutralize this. If white is bluish or not, it depends. Most whites are actually quite warm. So for example, titanium white, it looks positively yellow when you paint it on top of a white sheet of paper. Try, just grab any acrylic titanium white and paint a brush stroke on top of a white sheet of paper, and you'll be shocked on how yellowish titanium white can be. This is just an example. Not all whites are necessarily cool, okay? Some can be warm. And but we have an issue here, is that when we mix, I think I understand what you meant though. When we add white to a color, the tendency is that the color becomes cooler. If it's a warm color. Does a cool color become cooler with white? Or is it only the warm colors that cool down with white? I'm confusing you on purpose. Is it because the human eyes are more sensitive to warm colors, so they can more quickly see if a color cools down? And they're less sensitive to cool colors, so they don't mind so much if you add white to a cool color, because they don't see how quickly it warms up? Could that be the theory? Think about it, and then we'll speak more. If I want a rich dark, I might mix ultramarine with a burnt umber or similar. We will talk about it in a second, okay? About that decision. Now, let's start with my previous question. Black and white alone, depending on the pigments you are using, because there's many pigments of black and some pigments are even brownish. But most of the black pigments that you find in the art shop, when you mix them with white, you do not get gray. You get a bluish gray. And this is a big problem. So neutralizing colors by only adding black and white, you are not neutralizing them, you are making them bluish as well. So to make a neutral gray, you need to kill off any hint of blue that you might still see on your grayish color. So you need to add a little touch of brown. It's even easier if the brown is already grayish as well. And that's why Rob said very rightly and correctly that you should add a neutral brown, a brown that is already kind of muddy, you see. Something like a burnt umber or a raw umber will help to offset the bluish tone. I'm confusing everybody. Let me simplify now. To make a neutral gray, you mix black and white, and that makes it a bit too bluish in most cases. If you detect a bluish hue, then add a touch of brown, and that will kill the blue. Because brown is orange, and orange is the opposite color of blue. All right? And that's how you neutralize a color. You add gray. If we are working with opaque colors, this rule doesn't necessarily apply to watercolor. We're talking now things like oil paints, acrylics, etc. Because we're avoiding transparency at this stage. We're just mixing a real color and painting it opaquely. Now, there is a theory out there on the internet. Let me address this in this moment. There is a theory out there that you shouldn't use black. Wrong. You should use it. Actually, the whole Munsell system is based on the premise that you are actually using black to darken your colors. And with the Munsell system, you can mix any color that is possible to mix with pigments. Opaquely, I mean. So, of course, black is super important. There's nothing wrong with using black as long as you know how to use it. So, the whole Munsell system is based on the premise that you are using black to darken your yellows, for example. That you are using black to darken your violets, for example. There's absolutely nothing wrong with using black, I repeat. And all of the great painters of the past used black pigments. So, if you cannot paint better than Rembrandt, Leonardo, Sargent, which have all used black, including Monet, by the way. It's a lie that Impressionists did not use black. I know they spread that rumor, but thank God for chemical analysis. So now when we do chemical analysis of Impressionist paintings, we know that they used black, because black pigment is detected in the analysis, okay? So there is a rumor that says that if you mix, let's say, ultramarine and burnt umber or even burnt sienna, you get a black that is nicer than a real black pigment. This is factually not true, because if it's nicer, then it means it's not black. It's that simple. That means you did not mix black. Maybe you mixed a brownish black, more burnt umber, or maybe you mixed a bluish black, more ultramarine, but it's definitely not black, because if you mixed a neutral black, it would behave exactly like a neutral black would, exactly the same way. So if you want a bluish black or a brownish black, you can also do it with black. Just mix brown to black or mix blue to black, and the result is exactly the same in oil painting or in acrylics with opaque colors, with gouache, etc. The only exception to this rule, and the only time when I mix blacks from complementary colors, is if I am working with watercolor and with pigments that granulate, that create a texture. We will talk about that in a future lesson. In that case, yes, you might want to mix a special black that granulates. So for example, you might end up with blue dots on top of brown, a brown stain, and that creates a black that is somehow more interesting to look at if you like texture, if you like granulation. But if you are painting with opaque colors, it's a myth that mixing your own black creates a superior black. No, most of the times it's actually inferior. And once I had a student that really insisted, I mean, she was really insisting on this. So I made a simple test. I mixed in front of the class a series of blacks, and then I used real black pigments as well. And then I also mixed a series of darks, and I also with the complementary colors or with real black pigments. She could not distinguish the two colors because they were exactly the same. Do you understand? She could not distinguish at all. And yet she was insisting that you could see it's somewhat special, whatever. No, it's not special. It's only more special if you work with transparent layers, like watercolor, and only if the color granulates. If it doesn't, it's also not, it's pointless. And another reason that why you should use black as well is because the color tends to be very light fast. Black doesn't fade. Some of those colors do. And black is cheaper than expensive complementary colors. So I know people that want to mix black from the most expensive reds and the most expensive greens, and then they end up with neutral black. Waste of time and money. Okay, they could have just used black as well. So like I was saying, we have thankfully the Munsell color system, which is totally scientific. And because it's scientific, it's dispelling a lot of myths. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to end this live stream. Next week we are going to proceed, and next week we will be painting. So have your acrylics and paints ready. I'm going to show you what we will be painting with, okay, next week. Just give me a second. For some reason I cannot maximize. Here we go. Okay. Let me show you. You have a homework now. I would like everybody, just a quick one, mind some errors in color wheels. I will show you later. Most of the things you see online, they have some distortions of colors, okay? This one is pretty good because it comes from the Munsell book of color. Always try to refer to color charts that come from the Munsell book of color, because the colors tend to be a little bit more true to nature. Now, what I would like you to do is to paint this kind of sphere where you heavily compress the colors of the shadows and you make most shadows one flat color, and you heavily compress the colors in the lights and you make the difference between the different colors in the light almost nothing. Look how similar all those shades of gray are in the light area of the sphere. Look how flat all the shadows are, just like in classical drawing. And look how much variation you have in the middle, in between light and shadow. So along the terminator, you have big jumps of color. And what I would like you to do is make the lights very flat, make the darks very flat, and make the midtones very complex. I would like you to paint this with any color of your choice, and then send it to me. If you are one of the students, for example, from Dhaka University, you can send it to me via my WhatsApp, or in the group chats you guys can discuss with each other, because I want to see your homework. And what we are doing with that is just what classical masters did, like this 21-year-old student. Compressions of colors. All the lights are very similar. All the shadows are very similar. And it's the mid-tones that are complex. And that's where you find all the variation. Okay? I want you to paint a sphere where you do that. Where you are going to do exactly that. Flat lights, flat darks, complex mid-tones. You got it? I'm just going to read your last comments because we're about to finish today's lesson, an introduction to the Munsell color system. But as always, I don't care about Instagram, but yeah, you've got nothing to lose. Follow me if you want to support this on nelson.ferreira.visual.artist. Much more important than Instagram is LinkedIn. If you don't have LinkedIn, what are you waiting for? It's literally the only platform that I think is still worth being in, honestly. It's the only one that can push your career to higher flights. This is your YouTube channel that you're following. Make sure you subscribe and you activate the bell, so every time we start a live stream, you receive a notification. Okay. This was a drawing I did many years ago of Marilyn Monroe. And look, same story. All the lights are very light. All the shadows are actually crazy simplified. I didn't even bother sometimes to blend. And it's along the mid-tones that you have more complexity, including the textures in the mouth, etc. Do you understand? I'm doing the same. I did this when I was 20 years old, this drawing. Here it is. You can see it better here. So the difference between the light of the nose and the light on the side of the nose is minimal because it's in the light. I kept all the tones compressed. You see? Compression of tones. It's the mid-tones that I made more complex. And you can always follow my Facebook, my professional page, which is the one about art classes of drawing and painting, the English page, because I have a Portuguese one as well. Okay, I'm just going to read last questions, and then DACA students, I want you to jump to the Zoom meeting. All right? But let me just read any last comments. Thank you for streaming. Well, thank you, Rob. I'm glad you enjoyed it, and I'm glad you survived and lasted until the end. I'm really pleased. Everybody, please click now on the like button to help the algorithm propagate this lesson. Please share this lesson on your channels, on your WhatsApps, on your YouTubes, on your Instagrams, on your Facebooks, whatever, on your LinkedIns, obviously. And make sure you share this amongst your university colleagues. All the students from the Fine Arts Department should be watching these videos, okay? So make sure you share them amongst everybody. And thank you for listening until the end. I'm now going to have a Zoom meeting with some Dhaka University students. Next lesson, we're going to paint that sphere that I've just shown you before in true color. And that will be a simplification of real nature. A portrait is a sphere, for example. A bulby nose is a sphere. So we must learn to paint those things before we tackle the complex subject matters of painting from nature. Homework, I'm just going to show you again, so you guys don't lose the the image. You can always revisit the image. Paint a sphere like this. And deliberately, I chose a UV sphere that shows the different facets, just to show you, it becomes self-evident that all the lights, apart from the reflection, all the lights are so compressed you don't even distinguish between them. I mean, my goodness me, they're all the same color, huh? Almost. And all the shadows, the true shadows, are so compressed that you don't distinguish either. between different parts of the shadow. This is nature, this is reality. Learn to paint like this, and then add the complexity in the midtones. That's where you have the crazy variation of color. Understood? Understood. So, thank you once again, and I'm gonna see you at a Zoom meeting if you're from Dhaka University, Charukola. Bye for now. Take care. Oh yes, Sylvia, there is so much to learn about color. It's keep attending every Monday, and I'll keep teaching you more things. We only scratched the surface, okay? This is only the beginning of the Munsell color system. Ciao, adios, adeus, see you soon, au revoir. Okay, bye-bye.